Yeah, this phrase was coined by a person in our office as his summary to the debate between the reality of architecture versus digital architecture as a means in itself. It seemed a little bit abstract to me, though, so I went with this one for a little while. I thought this would guarantee a good turnout, but it seemed a little scandalous to me, so what I ended up with was this. Projects is pretty straightforward. Realizations, I thought I could add some personal insight as to, can't hear me now? Lost it? Go back to that.
Go back to that first.
That's a help. Do you think that's it?
I was kidding.
Hello, hello? No, not related. Okay, hello? Hello, oh, there. Hello. Maybe it's something I'm doing. Let's see if that's. Hello? No, no, no. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to keep going. In any event, projects is pretty straightforward. Projects that Morphosis is currently engaged in. Realizations, some type of insight that I might be able to give you that I would have liked to have known when I was here at the college. And questions to answers is kind of designed to alleviate any responsibility that I may have of making sense to you guys. So here we go. What I want to do is show you 6 built projects fairly quickly. Then if you have any questions about these particular projects, we can go more in depth with them at the end, and you can ask me questions or we can discuss them more. Then I want to talk about one project which is just at the end of its design stages right now, about ready to begin construction, called the San Francisco Federal Building, which is a naturally ventilated office building that Jack mentioned in the introduction. And then I have 2 other projects that are in the design stages that I'll go over again kind of briefly. The first project of which these first couple images you've been looking at is the Hypo Alpha Adria Center in Klagenfurt, Austria. And Klagenfurt is located within a region of southern Austria in proximity to Italy and Slovenia. The site for Hypobank is located on the city's sprawling edge where the urban network bleeds into the measured patchwork of farmland. So it's kind of a triangular site there. Let's see. This is the overall plan. The program includes the bank's headquarters, an event center, commercial space, and offices. There's also a final phase of the project that includes some retail and housing, which is just now finishing. This lower portion here, this kind of zigging form here, is the bank itself. And then this, everything kind of to the north up there is this final phase, which is just coming to an end, and this X form is the housing portion. All this is centered around this central courtyard type of space here. This is a computer model. The project attempts to engage both the urban and the rural forces at play in the site, transforming found elements of the city, interpreting existing infrastructure and building types, and striating the roof surface with lines that echo the directionality of furrows in surrounding fields. The design gives voice to these conflicting forces, harnessing the dynamism of global connectivity and anchoring it in a localized, activated land surface. The forms are triangulated around an open pedestrian forum, which is the plaza that I was telling you about. And the entrance is marked by an invitational gesture of a large canopy. A vast curved roof landscape shelters the majority of the program. This is a theme that you'll see in several of our projects, which is this kind of juxtaposition of a very aggressive form with a very subtle one. Kind of a matte or landscape surface with a much more architecturally floating surface, if you will. Perched upon leaning pilotis, a 3-story section of the south face seems to surge skyward, a visual effect which is enhanced by the repeated diagonals of the brise soleil protecting the glass curtain wall. This is the main entrance to the building here, and this is the brise soleil that we're talking about here. This is the south face. This is something else you're going to see as a theme, which is this kind of experimentation with the different layers of the facades, brise soleils, sunscreens, things of that nature. A couple others here. You're looking from the, you have the roofscape itself, the form itself coming out from above there. Again, most of these will be focused towards that southern form that I pointed out to you, just because they were the earlier phases and it's completed. A couple of interior shots here. You can see the brise soleil on the exterior of the building also. This image was taken just last week, which shows all 3 phases in its entirety. Some of you may recognize this. Possibly now. This is the University of Toronto graduate residence in Toronto, Ontario. Located at the northwest corner of the university's campus, the project performs traditional duties of establishing identity and providing gathering space within the campus, while it simultaneously intensifies the relationship between the university and the city. Graduate housing is configured as a perimeter block with a large open courtyard in the center. The 2 main components comprise a 10-story block on the eastern edge of the site and a 7-story block on the western edge. There's also a retail space at the street level. The 10-story block, which is the one on the far side of this image, is comprised of a skip-stop plan, meaning the elevator doesn't stop at every floor. This allowed us to achieve a higher density within the building envelope than one could achieve with a typical double-loaded corridor. The extruded perforated screen facade is composed of irregular openings that offer a counterpoint to the regularized rhythm of the housing inside. Housing in general is a very regularized program. And what we were attempting to do is to kind of mask that, so to speak, through this layering of this facade. Along the 6th and 7th floors, a glazed corridor hangs from and extends beyond the building's edge. An occupiable human cornice, it salutes the city and bears a monumental sign for the university's name. The final O of Toronto dangles provocatively from the sign's tail end as both playful moniker and invitation to debate. Generating controversy and sparking dialogue, this aspect of the project is well suited for the educational context that thrives on ideas, exchanges, and colliding visions. Stirring the relationship between the university and the city, student housing simulates further consideration of its boundaries, limits, and degrees of engagement. This is really, really true. This building, Canadians, I found in general to be fairly laid back and not overly aggressive in expressing their points of view. But this building, just what I like to do is kind of stand around and not make myself obvious when I'm at a job site. I often photograph a lot of our projects, so I interact with a lot of the kind of general public, I think, more than possibly some of the other people on the projects do. This building, as it was going up for a long time, the glass facade wasn't there, and just this O was hanging out over the street. Really alarmed a lot of people in Toronto, which I think is good. I mean, you have this constant kind of debate going on over this building that's being constructed. Most people, a lot of buildings go up, you don't even think about it. You see it there, it's a construction site. Nobody really talks about it, especially not kind of just the general layperson. But in any event, this is fairly controversial building in both regards. Some people really love it. Some people really don't like it. But it does stir controversy. This is the interior of the courtyard. It has a pond, a water feature in the middle there. There's a gathering space that you're seeing on the right, and all of the interior facing residences do get a lot of light also. So this is Diamond Ranch High School. Here we pursued two related strategies. The first was form-based and continued our office's previous research into blurring the normative distinctions between building and landscape, object and field. The secondary strategy had a social agenda. Simply, it was concerned with school culture and the impact of architecture on a young mind. Based on our analysis of the current state of public secondary education, we treated the project as an urban problem, engendering intensification along the principal pedestrian sidewalk and creating open pockets for chance encounters and unprogrammed learning environments. The project takes its cue from the site, using topography as structure while articulating forms whose irregular and intersecting planes mirror the seismic thrusts of the Southern California landscape. Here you can see, this is what it is in its built form, kind of the main entrance of the building here, as you're moving up through there. Couple different images. All of the roofscape, the kind of undulating forms of the roof are in response to the site, which is what this mapping of the Grand Canyon over this computer model is all about, that you were looking at a couple minutes ago. Here's what we were talking about with the main principal pedestrian sidewalk is what I called it, but we think of it as actually a street. Here, all the corridors are outside, which you can do in California. And students go from different building to different building. It becomes very active. And there are a lot of opportunities with these courtyards between buildings. Excuse me. Creating clusters of semi-independent units that integrate various fields of study, the plan defines 3 distinct schools within the school, which foster team teaching and a more intimate educational setting. Lower and upper grades are focused in a separate cluster of classrooms, while landscaped outdoor teaching areas act as courtyards between buildings, punctuating the classroom units with views of mountain and sky. We were interested in reversing the message that has been sent by a society that routinely communicates its disregard for the young by educating them in carelessly arranged temporary bungalows surrounded by impenetrable chain-link fencing. This is again the main street here with much fewer people in it. As a side note, I would like to ask if anybody here would feel comfortable landing a helicopter in the middle of this plaza here. This is a scene from the movie The Cell, which was not a really heavy plot, but very visually interesting movie. For some reason, Diamond Ranch High School has been the backdrop for these movies also. The Imposter, Say It Isn't So, Orange County, and a short film called Ripen, as well as commercials for Toyota Matrix, Toyota Camry, Mercury Mountaineer, Saturn L Series, Honda VTX, Mazda, BMW, Vogue, Victoria's Secret, Jack in the Box, McDonald's, Canon Color Copiers, Nissan, Mercedes-Benz. What is the story with that? We do not, unfortunately. It is a very big moneymaker for the school, however. And it sparks a continual debate in our office that if modern architecture is so useful for public consumption, then why isn't more of it being built? But we haven't got a response to that yet. So now I'm going to show you 2 very different restaurants that we did in Las Vegas, Nevada. The first is called Lutece. This is a model of that restaurant. The design for Lutece Las Vegas developed as both an architectural suggestion of and a foil to the chaos and immutable movement of the casino environment. The diner leaves the chaotic to arrive at the serene and finds a refuge that is informed through a restrained articulation of materials. References to the complexity of the casino are not erased, rather they are reworked to provide an opportunity for a stimulating exchange between the diners and their environment. The geometry emanates from an abstraction of the classical form dining room, finding its generative source in the massive chandelier above the main dining space. You can see off to the left in this photo here. Evolving through a fluidity of forms to mediate between the adjacent dining and bar areas. You see here. So essentially that ellipse you were looking down into in the model photo is the abstraction I was speaking of in terms of the formal dining room, with all of these kind of interstitial areas around there, serving as bar, entry, and circulation areas. A bronze wall in the form of a conical ellipse wraps around the main dining room and functions as the primary organizational gesture. This element is anchored by an elliptical art piece that is set in the floor and is comprised of 19,000 PVC cast human figures placed by hand in a translucent resin base. With arms raised above their heads, these figures support a 1-inch piece of laminated glass that bridges the elliptical entry bar area and the main dining room. That's what you see on the floor here in both of these photos. This piece was done by an artist named Do-Ho Soo. He's a Korean artist. And a pretty amazing guy. This is a conceptual piece he had for a flooring prototype. This is kind of a custom installation of it. What you're looking at here is a reflection down into the glass of the dining room adjacent. Now, the reflective glass surface provides a voyeuristic opportunity between the two seemingly separate rooms. Each of the figures is about 2.5 inches. It's kind of interesting because Lutece is a very nice restaurant. You have a lot of really well-dressed people coming in there. It's a very expensive restaurant. And if you're in Las Vegas, I recommend you get a drink in the bar and just kind of hang out for a little while. But I wouldn't, there's no need to eat there, unless you want to. But in any event, the piece is fairly subtle. So you have people coming in, some people just kind of breeze right over it. Other people are literally jump down on their hands and knees and amazed that there's little people down there, and they're very well dressed. It's kind of interesting, actually. The second restaurant, which is called Tsunami. This is kind of the generation of it here. Our intention was to create a space of hyperspatiality, stripped of its coverings. Las Vegas is a desert of nearly identical concrete and steel infrastructures concealed more or less convincingly of painted surfaces meant to resemble something other than what they are. We're interested in playing this game, but by a slightly different set of rules. The room was conceived as a space defined and modified by the manipulation of a two-dimensional image generated from a single 100-foot by 100-foot printed surface. Elements and allusions to Asian culture were densely collaged to suggest a sense of place through the use of colors, densities, saturations, and imagery. As the surface was physically manipulated, the building began to assume a shape identified by the interiors, exteriors, extrusions, and bends in the pieces themselves. The shell space for the restaurant was rendered void by painting the existing infrastructure out, creating a black box as a backdrop. This technique in drawing a section like this was something that is useful for us in terms of dealing purely spatially with the elements to the interior of the folds that you're seeing there. This is right through the main stair, which is coming down through the bottom there, but you see that the rest of it, which is a shell here, we're completely ignoring, actually. This is a couple photos of the finished piece. That's the stair there, and some of the folds as well. Excuse me, I'm going to get my water here. want to show this next project, even though it's a somewhat older project that we did, because in many ways it was the start of experimentation with a specific element of the architectural language that you've seen in many of these projects. It essentially started when a Korean man came into our office and asked us if we wanted to design a jean store. And apparently, I wasn't there at the time, but apparently we said sure. And what resulted was somewhat much larger. It was this piece here. It turns out that the person, the client who had come in was the representative of a clothing manufacturer in Korea, and had this 400 square meter site in Seoul. And the project was started by another design firm. It actually started construction. But he didn't feel that it reflected the progressive image of his company. So he asked us to do what is essentially a skin job and kind of give it some life. And so what we did was deal with this idea of clothing, fabric that you apply to the building. The requirement for this tower includes 5 floors of retail and penthouse offices for the international corporate headquarters of the client. The concept of wrapping in terms of clothing and fabric was explored, along with possibilities of producing forms that would define an architecture in isolation from constraints of the body. The volume of the building was enclosed with a second skin of perforated aluminum fabric set 20 centimeters beyond the face of the concrete enclosure. This cloth-like membrane, freed of the pragmatic constraints of a standard building surface, responds in a more lyrical and abstract way to various forces. On the interior, it's acting like a brise-soleil, because it's able to respond to the different sun conditions on the various sides of the site. On the exterior, the same translucent layer reinterprets city setbacks and constraints, wrapping and folding its way up the tower. This is, again, looking up there. We also took a slice kind of out of the middle of the project here, which you're seeing here, and then, again, the sunscreen. Okay, this is the new San Francisco Federal Building. I want to give you a bit of a background on it. The project was designed to optimize energy performance using passive and active design strategies. Site-specific conditions were analyzed prior to commencement of architectural design, permitting a high level of integration between mechanical, structural, and electrical engineers. And then I also want to go into a little bit of the background as to the selection process for this. It's a little bit unique. Our client is the General Services Administration, or the federal government. And our selection was the result of the Design Excellence Program that they have, which is an initiative directed by Edward Feiner, Chief Architect of the United States. Using the Design Excellence Program, Mr. Feiner has fought to promote the selection of progressive architecture firms for significant public buildings throughout the U.S., including federal courthouses, border stations, and office buildings. As a first-order design exercise, Morphosis was commissioned by the GSA to undertake an intensive research effort examining principles of energy efficiency that might guide the overall design project. From our work in Europe, we understood that direct engagement of issues related to conservation of resources and improvement of building systems performance would likely lead to very particular solutions that we would have to adhere to, but we were willing to go down that road. The study outlined a broad range of issues related to building form, circulation, massing, and the environment of the workplace, concluding that new models for federal architecture should be informed by a user-centric approach incorporating energy-efficient and green policies designed to improve the well-being of users by examining the quality of the workplace and user control of the interior environment. This is the city of San Francisco. Let me find where we are. Oh, there we are. Too close. This is our site, this big hole right here. This is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals building right here, which is another federal building. Market Street, Bay Bridge, downtown area, and the Civic Center Plaza here. Our site, with the exception of the federal courthouse here, was the first building kind of to bridge Market Street here. It's also significant in another way, which is that 7th Street right here, the site is on 7th and Mission, which is another pretty prominent street. When you get off the freeway and come into the Civic Center, this is your route right down 7th Street here. So in a lot of ways, we were thinking of it as a gateway to the Civic Center here. We were also very conscious that this is a building the federal government was very proud of, which turned out okay for us in regard to our scheme. But in any event, that's kind of where we are. We began the actual design in September 2000. The first design meetings were conducted with the full participation of key consultants to the project, including mechanical and structural engineers with Arup and daylighting experts from Horton Lees Brogdon Lighting. Several key initial decisions proved to be of lasting value to the project. Most significantly, the team recognized the benefit of the temperate climate in San Francisco and potentially advantageous local wind conditions. The specific environmental orientation of the 7th and Mission Street site would allow the team to pursue an overall design that de-emphasized the use of air conditioning and maximized natural daylight. So what we have here is a lot of fairly low buildings around us. This building here is one of the more built-up ones in the area, and you can see this kind of step back here is fairly rigidly conforming to the zoning envelope. It's just a spec office building, but this is kind of what we can expect here. Not a whole lot of development over here, and very strong wind conditions coming this direction here. Evolved over several working sessions, the guiding principles for the new federal building included the following. The overall building width would not exceed 18 meters. Passive and active exterior sun shading would be incorporated wherever possible, and the form and shape of the ceiling would be developed to enhance the penetration of natural daylight. Also, the structural system would emphasize thermal mass through the use of significant amounts of exposed concrete, and the envelope would be designed to encourage natural ventilation through a system of operable vents controlled by the direct digital control system. The final design concept for the new San Francisco Federal Building comprises 3 distinct components. A narrow tower raising to a height of 18 stories along the northern edge of the site, a 4-story annex building projecting from the tower at the western edge of the site, which is perpendicular to Mission Street, and a large public open plaza, connecting the building to the larger context of the neighborhood and the city. Secondary building elements include a daycare center immediately to the south of the tower and the building cafeteria at the corner of 7th Street and Mission. Okay. Here, this is the plan view down on the roof. This is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that I was showing you earlier. Mission Street, 7th Street. Our tower building here, annex building here. This is a smaller daycare center here, and what we call a pavilion, which is essentially the cafeteria for the building on the corner here. What this kind of orientation into the site has allowed us to do several things. First of all, it allows us to relate to the Court of Appeals building fairly nicely by, if we were to build to the extreme zoning envelope of the building here, which is like 200 feet along this face here, and this is only 160 feet, but it steps back to like 200 feet here. We would forever cast this building in shadow here. What we've done is kind of created another building that relates to it in scale and given it a bit of a forecourt here by adding this plaza out here, which is something that the federal government views it, and we do too, that it's kind of being given back to the city. There's kind of a deficiency of green area in the south of Market neighborhoods, so that's what this is attempting to do here. The tower building oriented this direction, again 18 meters wide, and a perforated metal sunscreen that comes up the face of it here. This is an axonometric, you can see here, so we're looking at it from the face here. So again, Court of Appeals is back over here, plaza building, pavilion, a daycare center. We're dealing with this language again of the wrapping skin kind of undulating out of the plaza, forming the roof of the daycare center and carrying up over the top of the building here, like a piece of cloth that has come up over the building and just kind of hardly, grazing over the top of it here. This is what we call the annex building. And again, the same height and kind of proportion as the Court of Appeals building. This is an early rendering, but it's pretty much where the building still is here. Directly in elevation to the tower building, prominently configured on the northern side of the site, which also serves to allow a lot of sunlight for the plaza for the majority of the day. So we're never casting the plaza in shadow. I'll go through a couple of these plans real quick. There's also a convention center on the lower portion of the building and some underground parking area, but not very much, just for tenant cars, agency vehicles there. Here you have the first floor plan, the daycare center, kind of main entry, the main core of the building, and the annex building here. As you move up through the building, it's fairly predictable because as you move up, but what you have is you lose the annex as you move above the fourth floor, and you get these kind of large open studio spaces. So you have three cores. The main core here, these two little subcores here, which are essentially plumbing cores. They do carry a bit of the HVAC needs of the building. But these large open areas. And this dimension here across this floor plate is 18 meters, which is 60 feet wide. So there's actually probably the length of this room. So you imagine being 18 stories in the air, you're never more than 30 feet from a window, floor to ceiling glass on both sides, with nothing around you. The views are quite spectacular. You get a lot of natural daylight, which is the point. This is a section through the building. There is a entry area at the front of the building. Here, as you get this main area where you're coming down here, is responding to this folded form that's coming up here. There's the main entrance, there's double height space, 6 stories tall above you. Coming in there, again, that's the courthouse in the background back there. This is a cross section to the side. This is a longitudinal section through here. Now, other design goals were not immediately connected to sustainability, but rather they were focused on worker health and community engagement. This caused an intensive look at the vertical circulation within the building, an investigation that led to the development of a dual elevator system with the main elevator cab stopping at every 3rd floor in the building. I mentioned this earlier, and this is where we started kind of experimenting. This was with the Toronto building with their graduate residents. It's called a skip-stop elevator system, which we have Corbusier to thank for in terms of the configuration in Toronto. But here, we were interested in looking at it in terms of encouraging interaction between people, and then also placing goals on your health, making you walk. So the main circulation system is this. It's very simple. The main entry, and then this main core coming up here. This is a section right through that core, okay? So what you have is these series of 3-story lobbies working their way up the building. They're actually all identical as you move up. There's a variation on the top floor, which is a 2-story, and a variation in between here, which is another 2-story one. So as you're moving up here, you can imagine that in most cases where you get off of an elevator, there's somebody getting off an elevator right above you. In this case, we're not limited with that, so you can walk out on, say, the 11th floor onto into a triple height space, which is fairly unique. This is a study of the main core area, so you have the section here again. But what you'll do is you'll go to a platform and then walk up a stair or down a stair to go to your, of course there are elevators that stop at every floor, I should say, of course. But the main ones, which are these, are only stop at every 3rd floor. This is a section through one of the lobbies here. So what we did is actually, we thought that we could probably get away with having somebody go up 1 floor and down 1 floor, but probably not up 2 floors, which is what we had first wanted to do. So what we did was we have, the elevator stops in the middle, and you have a double height space here, and then we regain this area below for a conference area, which is open to the public. So you have these public use conference centers, I should say public within the building, conference centers, between all the agencies as you move up to the building. So you get off here, you either go to your office here, or you go down a floor to your office, or up a floor to your office. The other thing that this enabled us to do is a lot of the tenant agencies in the building are quite large, and they don't occupy, or they occupy more than 1 floor actually. So what this allowed us to do was to kind of divide the building off with another layer. So sometimes you have a building, a tenant that occupies only half of a floor, like right behind this door, possibly a whole floor. Other tenants occupy an entire 3 floors, so this kind of gives them an identity also unto themselves, so they don't feel like they're walking through somebody else's lobby, so to speak. But this still has a very public nature, so I don't think that would be the case, but they're very comfortable with that. One of these stairs, something in regard to moving up and down the stairs, the idea was to make them larger, not like a typical, fire stair. They're larger with large landings. Some have benches on them with views to encourage people to use the stairs more. We figured that they would do that if they were inviting. So we have this here, and this 3-story space here. We actually did a study. Tom is very interested in quantifying as much, just in general, as much stuff as he can. We did a study, really loosely based, that well, it showed that if you work on a non-elevator stopping floor for your entire life, you'll live 2.5 months longer. And again, it's not very scientific, but it can't hurt. This is some 3-dimensional areas of this, our views of the space. Each one has a folded element here. This is a perforated plywood. I was speaking with somebody earlier about it. Most of the materials in the building are fairly straightforward. You have this concrete frame, stainless steel, stainless steel perforated sunscreen going over the face of it, and there's not a lot of warmth in the building. So what we try to do is inject these areas of some wood in some areas to give some kind of warmth to these spaces here. These images are all from our CDs, which we just completed here with some information stripped out. This is a structural model of the building, as I said, as a concrete frame, and this is for the purposes of thermal mass. It's a shear wall building, 240 feet tall, 3 main cores, shear walls on either end, 2 that are actually circular, and then this one is kind of partial here. Once we decided that the building would be naturally ventilated, it became clear that we would need some fairly complex thermal modeling of the diagram to confirm our design. The Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory was identified as a key participant in the evolution of the concept, providing critical modeling of the ventilation scheme. This is really, really critical, and I can't stress how much. If you're familiar with Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories, it's basically a lot of highly intelligent people accumulating an incredible amount of data about buildings. And they use this data to form most of the codes that we adhere to as designers. This was one of the first times that they had the opportunity to comment on the building prior to construction, so they were very excited about it, and they could change an element in the design, like by adding carpet or making the concrete rougher, and this would affect the airflow as it moved from one side to the other. And it was quite helpful to us because we actually had to manipulate the profile of our mullions at one point to allow more air to scoop in the right direction. So, perhaps the most challenging initiative in the design of the building has been the rules for the interior space planning. In order to enhance the benefit of the natural ventilation in the tower of the building, all individual offices at the perimeter of the floor plate have been eliminated, with open workstations aligning the window walls on the southeast and northwest walls. All closed offices, conference spaces, and other private environments have been located along a central spine of each floor plate. This arrangement of interior spaces required detailed discussion with the client and tenant agencies about the inherent trade-offs between two opposing realities. One is the traditional hierarchical office culture on the one hand, fresh air and daylit interiors on the other. So, this is a typical floor plate. What we have is the main core. Any closed office elements kind of build out from the middle here, work their way this way, work their way this way. All workstations here, here on the sides. If there happens to not be closed office, which is sometimes the case, this is all open. So you have 60 feet across of open work area. Now, this is a view down one of these. The cabins, one of the, call them the cabins, one of the scientists at Lawrence Berkeley laboratories kind of coined that term and it kind of stuck. So they call these the cabins, and then the corridor, and then the workstations on this side. Now, this part about the kind of standing the hierarchical portion of a typical office on its head is kind of real. If you get in most like developer-driven spec office buildings in the United States, you have a very large floor plate with all the perimeter offices, all the important people in perimeter offices around the outside where they have a view, and then all the worker bees in the middle with no access to daylight or ventilation. It required quite a bit of forward thinking on the part of some of the agencies to adhere to this design, and not all of them did. In fact, some some tenant agencies are just much more closed office intensive than the upper floors would support. And that's the primary reason that the annex building, which is that 4-story building that comes off the face and defines the plaza, that's the primary reason that exists. There are some areas that are kind of technology-rich environments which require a huge amount of air conditioning, and then some other agencies which just needed a corner office. So, but their windows don't operate, so that's their kind of trade-off. And that's a security concern that the government has. This is a cross-section through there, and this is why we call them cabins. You can see that they don't go all the way to the ceiling here. This is to allow airflow across the floor plate completely here. The enclosed environments are conditioned by an underfloor air distribution system served by water source heat pumps located above the plumbing cores. In order to allow for the free flow of ventilation air across the floor plate between the window walls, the closed elements at the center of the cabins have been designed for maximum height of 2,800 millimeters, providing a clear space for continuous airflow between the top of the cabin and underside of structure. The design of the structural slab above the open and closed office areas evolved as a direct response to the need to channel the air from the north to the south, as well as provide the most advantageous profile for the distribution of daylighting. The final design is a cast-in-place waveform 250 millimeters deep, and the slab successfully addresses structural considerations, daylighting goals, and provides the thermal mass necessary for the night cooling cycle. So you have the cabins here, This is this kind of waveform concrete. This is a section in the other direction. Like if you take a section here, this is the kind of the form that you have here. So you have this kind of directionality coming across here, which is actually what you see here. So that's that concrete coming out from across there. It was very important that we had a clear route here for the air. Air kind of comes in low on this side, comes up over here, and comes over here, and kind of swirls back and comes out. This is partially the reason that we have these upturned beams here. So the slab is hung below, which is a little bit backwards from what you would typically see. You'd have a beam below and the slab up above. But that's allowed us to do a raised floor throughout the building, which is nice for data, power and data. But it also allows us to bring air conditioning to these spaces that are enclosed here. These, by the way, are still glass on both sides, and they have a clear story here, so there is a great deal of transparency back and forth across here. The fact that this wave is formed this way, it kind of acts as like a three-sided duct, if you will, keeping air moving in one direction across the floor plate, like into the screen there, while still addressing, while still being flat enough to bounce daylight far into the space here, and not just having to go up and kind of, move around to nothingness. Early design studies suggested significant thermal benefit that could be realized by the development of a double facade on the southeast elevation. The team recognized that a wall assembly of two glazed layers separated by a sizable airspace would provide insulation in the winter months and contribute to a stack effect in conjunction with operable vents in the facade. Through further study, it was determined that the double layer across the entire elevation was not necessary for the performance. This was in direct response to the work that Lawrence Berkeley did on the project. This is a section through the south facade, and this is through the north facade here. This perforated metal sunscreen comes up the face here and prevents direct heat gain from hitting any of this glass here. And what we realized by having that was, before you even get a second layer of glass in here, was that the air in here, because of it's 58% open here, is already heating up and creating a stack effect. The scientist called it the leaky chimney theory. It's a chimney. It does create a stack effect, but it's just perforated. So, excuse me. So this facade, you have your operable windows here. You have a high window that's, this one is operated by the user. This one is operated by the mechanical system in the building. And this is a small trickle vent down here, which is also operated by the mechanical system in the building. So at night, actually on this side of the building, these windows open, cool air comes in and bathes the concrete slab and prepares for the next day, so to speak. Air heats up in here in the middle of the day and pulls air across here like this. And this window can be adjusted to user comfort. Excuse me. The north side of the building doesn't get a lot of direct sunlight, but it does, however, get some very, it gets some direct sunlight in the very late winter, in the late afternoon. We were seeing kind of a spike in the temperatures in the building, and that seemed to be the result of it. So what we have on the north side of the building are these glass fins spanning from floor to floor, which are translucent, which provide protection for this facade from sun that would normally come scathing across the north facade here. It doesn't come all the way around to get between the fins, but it does protect it from running up the side there. The performance of the envelope is due largely to the exterior sunscreen, comprised of perforated metal panels measuring 900 millimeters by 2400 millimeters. A persistent design challenge has been to optimize the visual transmission from inside to out. For this reason, approximately 18% of the panels will be operable to enhance views from the office workstations. What this means is that some of these panels will open, and you can open these if you want to see out, but if there's a chance that the building will put itself in direct heat gain, they will close. So these are, again, some images of the screen. We describe this purely three-dimensionally. We don't do any 2D drawings of this, except for the unfolds of it. This is what you have here. Break it down into its individual pieces. It's for description, for construction only. So this is what we have here. It's a way of systemizing a very irregular element. There's going to be a blow up of this. So everything gets broken down into panels, planes. And this is kind of how the contractor gets it. The only thing I haven't mentioned is this is again an earlier rendering, but there is a hole in the building on the 11th, 12th, and 13th floor that we call the Sky Garden. We used to call it the Sky Garden. The idea conceptually was a roof garden that was kind of inserted right into the middle of the building. Again, for the opportunity for the occupants to go outside of the building without going out of the building, really. And we didn't want it to be only for a certain agency, and so this is the purpose of putting it in the middle of the building to provide access for everybody and make it more accessible. The Design Excellence program also engages in the Art and Architecture program, which is the kind of 1% art that you may have heard of, where you take 1% of the building budget and devote it to art, which is a great program. And what we were not interested in doing was having a sculpture in the middle of the plaza that was the art. So we sought early on to kind of engage the art into the building itself. And we're working with James Terrell, who is a light artist. He does a lot of work with light, if you're familiar with his work. And he is actually going to light this space here, which we were excited about. We thought about it as a potential location, but he was pretty excited about it because it also addresses the urban scale. So he's able to kind of, the art program really addresses the needs of the city, but also the building itself. So his goal is to create what is essentially a cube of light in the sky, on the skyline there. We anticipate it will look something like this. He doesn't do renderings, but we did this one, and he liked it. So there you have it. The next building, next project I want to show you briefly is the Satellite Operations Facility for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency. The project has been sited at the northern edge of the Sitlin Federal Center within the security fence that wraps the complex. The site is a partially woody grass field, kind of sloping from, I think it slopes to the south. The proposed 19,000 square meter project comprises 14,000 square meters of modern office space and 5,000 square meters of space dedicated to the mission of the Satellite Operations Group. Here's a couple of plans for orientation. Again, we're dealing with a mat, as we call it a mat, and a bar, volumetrically. So you have some parking in the bottom, a large kind of open area of office space here, moving up. And then up above, this is a programming. This is kind of interesting. It's a way, graphically, we're dealing with different tenants. Although NOAA is essentially one tenant, they do break down into different departments. And these kind of open office areas, and this is true in the San Francisco building as well, we're using kind of like these kind of large-scale super graphics to kind of identify and give character to these different areas of the building. So, for instance, in the 3-story elevator lobbies, we'll have a slightly different graphic element in each one of them. this is kind of in the programming stage here. We don't know how it's going to manifest itself in the NOAA, but that's kind of what this is. So here's the building. There's again the mat at the bottom, the bar up above here. These are all sections combined with a rendering of the 3D model. The bar building hovers above a landscape dome which covers a single level of office space and ancillary program. The mat is situated partially below grade, taking advantage of the gentle 3-meter change in grade from the north to the south of the site, and that's where the underground parking is located. The orientation of the bar is on the true north-south axis to optimize the performance of the antenna that crown it. The concentration of dishes on the roof asserts the iconographic character of the project and maximizes the open green space on the extended site, producing a park-like environment. There were some fairly specific requirements for all of these dishes, and it took us quite a while to get them to agree to put them all on the roof. They kind of wanted them dotted all through this landscape here, but we felt very strongly that it would enhance the project to have it up above. These are some models here, and this is a section across here. You can see very clearly there the relationship between the two, and again, another model. Because you guys are so close, I wanted to show you a few drawings of the University of Cincinnati new recreation center. Just fairly quickly, this is a 350,000 square foot recreational facility, including housing, campus store, dining hall, and varsity gym. The project is a series of connective events that engage peripheral flows on the campus and generate an urban intensification and density. By that, I mean that the building is located at the center of the site. I mean, it's the center of the campus. And it's actually, this is the football field here, if you're familiar with it. There's an area that runs right through the middle here called Main Street. Now, this is the area below grade, but up above here, you see the whole thing is tapering downward. They have this area called Main Street, which is a pretty significant thoroughfare for the campus. We were kind of playing on keeping that, but providing variations through there. So through our building, Main Street comes kind of right through our building here, and this is all kind of public open space here, which gives you views down to the pool below or the recreation facility, and then you're coming under the housing here, across here. I'll go through these fairly quickly. This is a section through the facility itself. A couple sections here and models. You can see the model up above there. That's actually useful. This is with the roof off. There's these trusses that span across here, which is what you're seeing here. These free span across here. There's like six basketball courts down below here. And all of this is kind of tucked in behind and underneath the stadium. These are all design and development drawings for the building themselves. It's actually one of the more complex, truly complex buildings that we've done. A lot of the forms tend to be complex, and we just accommodate our costs by reducing or simplifying material costs. This building is actually is a bit of a challenge to document. It's pretty interesting. Los Angeles. It's worth mentioning that we have just begun construction on our first design-build structure, which will contain the Southern California offices of the California Department of Transportation, also known as Caltrans. I think it's going to look something like this. I've never done a design-build project before, so this is where we are. Currently, it looks something like this. And what else is going on in Los Angeles? A few blocks from this is another fairly well-known architect's building, Disney Concert Hall, which is coming along. They've got a lot of the stainless steel on, and this is right on Grand Avenue here. It's kind of exciting, very heavy, heavy steel structure there, but it's amazing. It's amazing. It's interesting to see it going up. These are a couple of views of it. And we're actually working with the same subcontractor named Permastelisa, which is building our perforated stainless steel sunscreen for the San Francisco building, the same people that are doing this. So this is it. That's the building it's replacing. Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. That's not really replacing, it's kind of, well, it's kind of replacing. The concert hall, and then off in the distance back there, the newly opened Our Lady of the Angels Cathedral by Rafael Mineo. A 300-year building. It's totally base isolated. It's fairly impressive. A lot of concrete. Okay, now, realizations. I've had 3 since my graduation from Ball State, and if they seem naive to you, then more power to you. Number 1, the world is full of people. People, person, 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 people, person, people. It takes about 3 really stupid comments from either a really famous person or a really successful person before you really get what I'm talking about. But it's true. All of these people are just walking around and essentially doing the same thing we're doing to different degrees, and we can talk to any of them. Person, person, definitely person, definitely a person. Rem Koolhaas, right here. If he was here in this room, we could have a conversation with him, and he would tell us what we know. It took me a long time to kind of, or what he knows, he would tell us what he knows. It took me a long time to really get a handle on this, but people really like to tell you what they know. It's important. People, person. Things get done, buildings get built, meaningful things happen by finding the right person and talking to them. It's all people. Second one, the world is not sophisticated. It's complicated, it's not sophisticated. Do not let images like this fool you. This is a 4-mile in circumference particle accelerator. Millions and millions of dollars devoted to this type of thing so that we can just begin to understand how our world is operating. It's incredible. All of this. If you really want to know what this is, you can find out. Somebody will tell you. Your car has about 50 computers on board. Yes, it's complex. No, I don't understand how it works. But if I really wanted to, I think I could figure it out. I think somebody would explain it to me. These images show the patterns that emerge by varying the speed between 2 streams of air. Configurations that are completely unpredictable in the mathematical sense, but they have a regularity to their structure. We cannot explain this. We know that it happens. The most we know is that it's someplace between orderly and random. in relationship to architecture, all of this, architecture is about here, from what I've ascertained so far. Despite the complexity and digitized version of design made up of 3D modeled, laser cut, computer milled, rapid prototype, robot built, this and that, we're still talking about steel, concrete, glass. It's not rocket science. It's pretty jarring, actually. I was recently reading about the possibility of design and construction at the molecular level. That's to say, altering and creating buildings and forms without a traditional means of construction. That sounds sophisticated to me. Third thing, everything is relative. All due respect to Underworld here. If Palladio was alive today, he would not be designing in the way that we study him. Everything is judged and evaluated based on its context. If you live in Hollywood, California, you would be vaguely alarmed, if at all, if you saw this from your backyard. It's completely relative. Los Angeles comprises 450 square miles, so the ecological footprint of Los Angeles is 521,000 square miles, which is roughly the size of Peru. If you go to a beach like this your entire life, you would not know the difference between a real beach and this. Same with this. We evaluate ourselves and our expectations of what is normal come from our direct context and the people around us. So what I'm trying to say by all of this is surround yourself with extraordinary people. And the slide you've been waiting for.